Well, welcome into Sports X, everybody. My name is Brian Dunn, and as always, to start off our show, we have our Norwood High School athletics director, John Longley, with us. John, thank you for being on once again.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So, this season is obviously different, and the reason why it's different, and the big kicker, is that it's the brand new season. It's the inaugural Fall 2 season, and it was because of the pandemic that this all came about. So, when we talk about seasons before, you sort of get the gist of, okay, there's a fall season, there's a winter season. Even though there's modifications, you can still sort of follow it. This had to be created from scratch. So, from an administrative standpoint, when did the talks of Fall 2 start, and when did it sort of become a reality that this season was going to happen?
So when they created the school year this year for athletics, the MIAA, they essentially broke it up into 4 seasons with generally the same amount of time, about 10 weeks or so. And so they added the third season, the Fall 2 season, which was basically put in place for some of the sports that were unable to run during the traditional fall or traditional winter season. So it was kind of a spot for those sports to go once, with the hope that some of the regulations would lighten up and certain sports would be allowed to play, like football, for example, and cheerleading. They were not allowed to play during the traditional fall season. And a lot of leagues opted to not do girls volleyball during the traditional fall because it was indoors. And so when everything was new and we didn't have a lot of information, we stayed away from any indoor sports during the traditional fall. So naturally, it was a spot for girls volleyball, football, if that eventually became approved, which it did, and cheerleading. And then as we moved into the winter, the sport that one of the sports that was unable to go during our traditional winter was boys and girls indoor track, because the Reggie Lewis Center was not available at that time. And so that essentially moved to Fall 2. The only sport that still hadn't been approved was wrestling, and that eventually was moved to the spring season. So the way everything was set up is that there'd be 4 seasons, about the same time. And so the fall followed the similar format that we used in the Fall 2, followed the format we used for fall and winter, which was essentially the teams played half the games. If you traditionally had a 10-game schedule like football, or 10 or 11 games, you played 5 or 6. If you traditionally had an 18 to 20 game schedule, you played half of that. So the weeks were the same. Track ended up getting because there weren't any invitationals during Fall 2, so they were able to pretty much play their traditional 5 dual meet season outdoors instead of indoors, which was a little bit different, but they missed out on the invitationals. So still it was about half of their traditional season. Volleyball ended up playing 12 matches instead of 18 or 20. Cheerleading was able to do sideline cheer at the football games, and then they were allowed one competition, a league competition, at the end of the year. It ended up kind of following the previous 2 seasons as far as scheduling and number of contests, and so.
Yeah, I think it was a unique way, the way the schedule worked, but I think also one of the unique things was the timing and the turnout, because now you have this extra season where it's between the winter and the spring, and a lot of kids that are few sport athletes sort of know what they're doing in the winter and spring, but this is an extra opportunity, an extra 4 or 5 weeks where they might try a different sport, or this is a unique opportunity for them to try something new. From a roster standpoint, did you notice any of that?
Yeah, I think there was some of that. I think a lot of times also, it works both ways. It's an opportunity to play a sport that maybe you haven't played because you're open, but also maybe you've made commitments to do maybe work commitments, or maybe you play another sport for a private club during the spring. And so we did see some of that. I think generally our numbers, from this year compared to last year or previous years will end up being generally about the same as we've had. And so that's when you add them up in total after everything is all said and done. But I think it was, the numbers were, I think, a little bit down across the board during the fall too, not just in Norwood, but I think across the state because of the new season and people already making commitments or things like that. But it wasn't, they weren't terribly low. They were competitive, and it was certainly unique. We were fortunate. When I think back, we started the Monday after February vacation, and the big X factor was going to be the weather, because we were going to be outside for football. We were going to be outside for indoor track. We were going to be hosting essentially indoor track, but it was essentially outdoor. We were running the indoor events outdoors like we would do in the spring, which ended up working out fine. The weather was good. There weren't any issues. Honestly, I think there was one day during the whole fall 2 season where we had to cancel a practice due to weather. And obviously cheerleading and girls volleyball, they were indoors. We had there was very little COVID impact during fall 2 as things started to kind of get better, not just the numbers in Norwood and the cases in Norwood, but the communities beyond. That mirrored the athletic program, so we started to see things lighten up as far as that was concerned. So it was, I think people definitely feel like it was successful, so that was nice to know.
And I think a big thing to note too is that it's this placeholder season, but you're not locked into certain sports. Because I think it was Hopkinton, they had swimming in their fall too, and we had swimming in our winter, but some people did volleyball in the fall, and
right.
And so the sports switched around. But the idea is that this is the extra season for if you make the decision to push it off,
right.
You would have had the chance to do it, and it sounds like all the kids had the chance to play, which is really good.
Yeah, so I think so in the winter season we ended up doing boys and girls swim and dive, and because we had a facility that was available to us. Not all of the facilities were available and open. A lot of the schools, use Keefe Tech out in Framingham and for swimming, and Keefe Tech wasn't open during the winter season, so there was about half of the league did swimming during the winter, the other half did it during fall too. Some of the schools, half of the league ended up doing indoor track during the winter, and they got a little bit of time at Wheaton, and the other half of the league, because there weren't modifications out at the time for the sport, a lot of the other half of the league felt more comfortable waiting for the modifications and doing it during fall too. So I think it all worked out. I mean, it ended up being pretty successful. Thinking about the football season, the football team went 4-1 and won a share of the large title. That was the first football league championship since 2002. So that was. I know we were all looking forward to a really successful football season in the fall, so we were happy that sport became approved and were able to play, and I think everyone felt really good about the progress that they made, and it was really fun to watch them play. And volleyball ended up having a really challenging schedule because we only played the large side, and so we couldn't get a full schedule in. And some of the schools that were would have been more competitive with in girls volleyball this year would have been on the smaller side. So that was probably the most difficult schedule that they've played in recent years. Cheerleading, again, they were able to have a cheering competition at the end of the year where we placed second. And boys and girls indoor track had a good year. The girls were 2 and 3, the boys were 3 and 2. And I know that, for example, on the girls' side, because I happened to have coached the girls' team the last 3 years, and we had Vivica Cord in the shot put. She was one of our captains. She was undefeated during the course of the Fall 2 season, and she was a TVL All-Star, and which she had previously been as well. And Caroline Davey was also undefeated during the fall season. Caroline was one of our captains, and she was a league All-Star, and she had been a league All-Star previously as well. And Olivia Badette was also one of our league All-Stars, and she ended up being a 3-time league All-Star. And I know I mentioned at our awards night that all 3 of those girls were really, highly accomplished, and Olivia's going to go down as one of the top 1 or 2 girls distance runners in school history, and she's going to continue. She signed a letter of intent to run at Merrimack, and Caroline is a fantastic lacrosse player, so she signed her letter of intent to play women's lacrosse at Stonehill. So, I mean, it was a pretty good group. It was a small group, and we were impacted by it not being in the winter. Our roster shifted a little bit too. So yeah, they were really happy. John Palumbo on the boys' side also had a really strong season, and Jake McCarthy. I know Mr. Curran was pleased with the boys' season as well.
Yeah, and you sort of segued into my next transition as the girls' track and field coach, and you can speak to the boys too. Obviously, it was a great season, but I think one of the biggest things that people sort of maybe not totally understand is, yes, the indoor season was outdoor, but you might think, oh, it's still track, but there are a lot of events that had to be modified and trained differently, because in an indoor setting, it's easier. It's obviously more climatic to do, but
right.
In outdoor, it really changes the game. So how did you guys prepare for that?
Yeah, it's actually, so we used the indoor events outdoors. So we did have to kind of adjust the track a little bit. There's not as many events during the indoor season, so there's a little bit less to kind of adjust to. Once you get to the spring season, you add a lot more of the field events, which becomes, the numbers. It becomes just a much bigger challenge as far as kids learning the events and preparing for them and things like that. So the winter season is definitely with the events smaller, but it was fun. You run the 55 dash indoors, so we ran that outdoors, and we wanted to keep it true to the indoor events. We didn't, even though it was outdoors. So it was good. I think the kids enjoyed it. During a traditional winter season, because the track here is a walking track. It's not a training track, and so we do try and train outside as much as we can. But as we know, once you get to January, typically, with the snow and really cold weather, it's difficult to train outside. We can usually do it in December. So it was nice. We were able to train outside and have the meets outside, and again, it was a different group of schools that competed in the Fall 2 season. So in track and field, one of the things similar to what girls volleyball saw is they only saw the large side. And cross country and track and indoor and outdoor track and field, you only compete against the large side. So you never get to compete against the small as you do in the other sports. So we were able to compete against a few of the smaller schools that we normally don't see. So that was fun too, to compete against different schools. Like we usually don't compete against Norton. We were able to go against them, Medway, Bellingham. So that worked out. That worked out good.
Now, with track too, there's a record of times and things that happen, and that season was very fortunate enough to have good weather
right.
in terms of not being too cold.
Right.
But with track itself, do you guys think weather played a factor at all, and maybe some, not in placements per se, but just overall times compared to what they had in years past?
Yeah, well, I think when you're in the when you have the Reggie Lewis Center, it's climate control. You have automated timing, things like that. So that wasn't set up this year. So it's tough to judge, what your time would have been indoors at. There wasn't any invitationals, so there was no, like we were fortunate enough to be able to have a league meet this spring. We just had it last Friday for spring. We traditionally would have that indoors. We weren't able to have that because the regulations at the time weren't allowing, a competition like that. So it was definitely different, and it was, more limited, similar to the other sports. There was, and no tournament, so that's tough to say a time indoors or outdoors. So I think, it did lend to the kids that decided to stay with it. We do have some kids that changed to a different sport in the spring, which is fine. But the kids that stayed, interestingly enough, they've really been doing track for continuous since February. So,
and just to bring it all together here,
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things for people to know is that, and I've talked to a lot of kids, and especially with the regulations, and at least for fall 2, there wasn't a tournament, there were invitationals,
Right.
there wasn't any sort of postseason,
Right.
but given the fact that even though it's 5 weeks, you talk to any kid and they say, I'm glad I got to play. And I think that is so valuable that kids right now are saying, hey, it is what it is, but we got to play. And especially for a brand new season where they just have to jump right in, I think that's extremely valuable.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, when we look back at this year, I think when you ask the kids in general, that's what so they always say, when you ask a kid about playing, winning or losing or whatever, the response from a kid is, what's the most important thing to you? And kids want to play and they want to have fun. A lot of winning and losing is obviously a byproduct of playing, and I think everyone prefers to win and strives to win. But when you speak to the kids, their first response is they want to play, they want to have fun, they want to compete, with their teammates and classmates. And overall, now that we're kind of recording this now at the end of the spring season, I think we've provided, and I've said all along, we wanted to provide, a competitive experience where the kids could be, proud of what they've done and the work that they've put in, and they've had accomplishments, and I think that that's been the case. I think it's definitely been, a valuable, we put a product out there that had value, that the kids could be proud of, and they can look back on, even though it was not what we anticipated or hoped for. It was, we were able to play, and I think people will, I think that that's something we all can look back on and be proud of.
I completely agree, and I think you and I talked off air about this a lot, is that, when you're in the season, it's go, 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 and you're in that athletics mode, but when you get to sit down and look at it from a whole, it's really interesting and it's really rewarding to look back and say, they did that,
Right.
And they are the first, if not the only, athletes that will ever be able to say they did it and they did it well.
Right.
And I think that's really, really cool. Well, John, I really appreciate you coming in today. I think the fall 2 was a success overall,
Yeah.
I would say. But yeah, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
And we will have more across the fall 2 coaches and players, so stick around. We'll be right back.
Thank you.